He cheated with my cousin at our wedding, and as I stand here in this 5-star resort suite that was supposed to be ours, watching his best man emerge from the bathroom with nothing but a towel around his waist, I can't help but think that sometimes the most devastating betrayals lead to the most exquisite revenge. But let me back up, because this story, my story, doesn't start with this moment of twisted vindication. It starts 6 hours ago, in the bathroom of the hotel where I was supposed to be getting ready for the reception of my dreams. The wedding ceremony had been perfect. Picture perfect, actually. Daniel had looked so handsome in his navy suit, his eyes misty as I walked down the aisle in my grandmother's vintage lace dress. Everyone said we looked like we belonged in a magazine. His vows had been everything I'd dreamed of, promises of forever, of choosing me every single day, of being my safe harbor in any storm. I remember thinking, as he slipped the ring onto my finger, that I was the luckiest woman alive. The irony tastes bitter now, metallic and sharp like blood from a bitten tongue. The reception was in full swing when nature called. I'd been floating on cloud 9, my cheeks aching from smiling, my heart so full it felt like it might burst. Daniel had been the perfect groom, attentive, affectionate, spinning me around the dance floor like I was the only woman in the room. I gathered up my dress, the layers of tulle and silk suddenly feeling heavier than they had all day, and made my way to the bathroom. The hotel corridor was quiet, muffled music from the reception drifting through the walls. My heels clicked against the marble floor, each step echoing in the empty hallway. I pushed open the bathroom door and froze. The sound hit me first, a low moan, breathy and desperate. Then the image burned itself into my retinas like a brand. Daniel, my husband of exactly 4 hours, pressed against the marble counter with his pants around his ankles. And beneath him, her bridesmaid dress hiked up around her waist, was my cousin Rebecca, my maid of honor. My blood turned to ice water in my veins. The bouquet I'd been carrying, white roses and baby's breath, the same flowers from my grandmother's wedding, slipped from my numb fingers and scattered across the floor. They didn't notice me at first. They were too lost in each other, too consumed by their betrayal to sense my presence. Daniel's hands were tangled in Rebecca's auburn hair, the same hair I'd helped braid earlier that morning while we talked about love and forever, and how lucky I was to have found my soulmate. The sob that escaped my throat was involuntary, a sound of pure anguish that came from somewhere deep in my chest. They sprang apart like they'd been electrocuted, Daniel's face cycling through shock, guilt, and something that might have been panic. Rebecca's lipstick was smeared across her mouth, her makeup ruined. She looked at me with wide, terrified eyes, and I saw something there that made my stomach drop even further. This wasn't the first time. This wasn't some moment of weakness, some wedding day mistake fueled by too much champagne and emotion. This was practiced, familiar, routine. "Sarah, Daniel started, but I was already backing away, my vision blurring with tears that I refused to let fall. Not here. Not in front of them. I turned and ran. The ballroom was a blur of color and sound as I pushed through the crowd, my dress catching on chairs and tables. I could hear Daniel calling my name behind me, but I didn't stop. Couldn't stop. I needed air, needed space, needed to be anywhere but here, where the scent of betrayal clung to my skin like smoke. I found myself in the hotel's garden, doubled over beside a fountain, my body convulsing with silent sobs. The white roses in my bouquet lay scattered behind me like fallen snow, and I thought about how fitting that was. Beauty destroyed, innocence shattered, everything pristine turned to waste. My phone buzzed with texts. Daniel probably, maybe Rebecca. I didn't look. The rational part of my mind, the part that had planned this wedding down to the last detail, that had organized seating charts and coordinated with vendors and somehow managed to keep track of 100 different moving pieces, was telling me to go back inside, to confront them, to make a scene, to let everyone know what kind of man I'd just married. But the broken part of me, the part that was currently crumbling like a house of cards in a hurricane, whispered something else entirely. I sat there in the garden for what felt like hours, listening to the muffled sounds of my own wedding reception continuing without me. The bride who had vanished, the princess who had discovered her prince was actually a frog, and not the kind that transforms with true love's kiss. My phone rang. Marcus, Daniel's best man. The one person at this wedding who had always been honest with me, who had become a genuine friend over the years I'd been with Daniel. Marcus had been the one to help Daniel plan the proposal, had been there for every milestone, every celebration. I almost didn't answer. But something in me, some instinct I couldn't name, made me swipe to accept the call. "Sarah?" His voice was tight, urgent. "Where are you? People are starting to ask questions." I took a shaky breath. "I'm in the garden, by the fountain. Stay there." "I'm coming." The line went dead. 5 minutes later, I heard footsteps on the gravel path. Marcus appeared around the corner, his tie loosened and his usually perfect hair mussed like he'd been running his hands through it. He took one look at me, dress stained with tears, makeup probably destroyed, bouquet nowhere to be seen, and his expression shifted from concern to something darker. "What happened?" he asked quietly, settling beside me on the fountain's edge. I told him everything. The words came out in a rush, disjointed and painful, like I was pulling glass from a wound. I watched his face change as I spoke, saw the moment he understood what I was telling him. "Jesus," he breathed. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. I'm so fucking sorry." We sat in silence for a long moment. The sounds of the reception seemed to grow louder, more mocking. People were having fun, celebrating love, toasting to happily ever after while I sat here with my world in ruins. "How long?" I asked finally. Marcus was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. Then, "I don't know for sure, but I've suspected for months." The words hit me like a physical blow. Months. While I was planning our wedding, choosing flowers and cake flavors and saying yes to the dress, Daniel was fucking my cousin. While I was writing vows about forever and faithfulness, he was making a mockery of everything I thought we had. "Why didn't you tell me?" The question came out sharper than I intended. Marcus flinched. I tried to convince myself I was imagining things, and then when I was sure, "God, Sarah, how do you tell someone that? How do you destroy someone's happiness based on suspicion?" I understood, in a distant way. It was the same reason I hadn't confronted Daniel immediately, hadn't marched back into that ballroom and announced to all our friends and family what I'd discovered. Some truths are too big, too devastating to handle in the moment. "What do you want to do?" Marcus asked gently. I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time all evening. Marcus had always been handsome in a quiet way, all sharp angles and thoughtful eyes. He was taller than Daniel, broader through the shoulders, with the kind of presence that made you feel safe just by being near him. I'd never really noticed before, too wrapped up in my relationship with Daniel to see what was right in front of me. But now, sitting here in the wreckage of my marriage, I found myself noticing everything about him. The way he was looking at me like I was something precious that had been broken. The way he'd dropped everything to come find me. The way he'd been there for me more consistently than my own husband. "I want to leave," I said finally. "I want to get out of here and never look back." Marcus nodded. "I'll drive you. Wherever you want to go." "No." An idea was forming in my mind, crystallizing like sugar in water. "I have a better idea." I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. The honeymoon fund Daniel and I had been building for months was still there, untouched. $12,000 for 2 weeks in the Maldives. First-class flights, overwater bungalows, spa treatments, private dinners on the beach. The trip was supposed to start tomorrow. "Marcus," I said slowly, "how would you feel about taking a vacation?" He stared at me. "Sarah, you can't be serious." "I'm completely serious." I was already pulling up the booking confirmation on my phone. "The flights are in both our names. Well, Daniel's and mine. But I'm Sarah Morrison now, legally. And you're Marcus Morrison's best man. We could make this work." The more I thought about it, the more perfect it seemed. Daniel would come looking for me, would expect me to be heartbroken and waiting for him to explain, to apologize, to somehow make this right. Instead, he'd find me gone, really gone, to the honeymoon he'd helped plan, with the man he trusted most in the world. "This is insane," Marcus said, but I could hear the consideration in his voice. "Is it? Or is it justice?" I stood up, energy flooding through me for the first time since I'd walked into that bathroom. "He cheated on me at our wedding, Marcus. At our wedding. With my cousin. He doesn't get to have his perfect honeymoon, too." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, studying my face. Then, slowly, he smiled. It was a dangerous smile, full of possibility and mischief. "When do we leave?" The next few hours passed in a blur of preparation. Marcus went back to the reception, made excuses about me feeling unwell, handled the logistics of winding down the party. I stayed in my hotel room, crying until I had no tears left, then methodically packing for a trip I'd never planned to take with anyone but Daniel. I changed out of my wedding dress, hanging it carefully in the closet like a costume I'd never need again. The woman who had put on that dress this morning was gone, replaced by someone harder, more calculating. Someone who had learned that fairy tales were just stories, and that sometimes the only way to survive was to write your own ending. I packed strategically. Bikinis and sundresses, the lingerie I'd bought for Daniel, the jewelry he'd given me over the years. If I was going to do this, I was going to do it right. My phone buzzed constantly, Daniel calling and texting, his messages growing more frantic as the hours passed. Rebecca too, paragraphs of apologies and explanations that I deleted without reading. My mother, my sister, friends who had been at the wedding. Everyone wanted to know where I was, if I was okay, what had happened. I turned off my phone. Marcus knocked on my door at 3 a.m. He was showered and changed, carrying a duffel bag and wearing an expression I'd never seen before, determined, almost predatory. "Ready?" he asked. I looked around the hotel room one last time. This was it, the point of no return. Once I walked out that door, there would be no going back to the life I'd thought I wanted. "Ready," I said. The airport was nearly empty at 5 a.m. Our flight to the Maldives didn't leave until 8, but I couldn't stay in that hotel room another minute. We checked in without incident. Mrs. Morrison and her companion, exactly as the booking stated. The airline clerk didn't bat an eye when I showed my brand new marriage certificate and ID. We found a quiet corner in the departure lounge, 2 cups of coffee growing cold between us. Neither of us had slept, but I felt wired, electric with the magnitude of what we were doing. "Are you sure about this?" Marcus asked for the 10th time. "Really sure?" I thought about Daniel, probably waking up in the hotel right about now, reaching for me and finding empty sheets. I thought about him realizing I was gone, calling my phone and getting voicemail. I thought about the moment he'd understand that I wasn't just hiding, I was gone. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," I said. The flight was long, but I didn't mind. For the first time in months, I had nowhere to be, no schedules to keep, no expectations to meet. I was supposed to be on this plane, supposed to be heading to paradise. The only thing different was my companion. Marcus was easy to travel with. He handled the logistics without making a fuss, made sure I had water and snacks, didn't push me to talk when I needed to think. He was exactly what I needed, steady, reliable, there when I needed him, but not overwhelming. Somewhere over the Indian Ocean, I finally turned my phone back on. 47 missed calls from Daniel. 32 text messages. Voicemails I didn't listen to. My mother had called 6 times, my sister 12. Rebecca had sent me a novel of apologies that I scrolled past without reading, but it was the last message that made me smile. A single text from Daniel, sent just an hour ago. "Sarah, please call me. I know you're hurt, but we can fix this. I love you." "Where are you?" I showed the message to Marcus, who read it with the expression of disgust. "He actually thinks he can fix this," he said, shaking his head. "He thinks I'm going to come crawling back." I replied, "He thinks I'm going to forgive him because I love him, because we're married, because throwing away our relationship would be harder than dealing with his betrayal." And instead, I looked out the airplane window at the endless blue ocean below us, then back at Marcus. Instead, I'm going to show him exactly what he's lost. The resort was everything the brochures had promised. Overwater bungalows stretched out into crystal-clear lagoons, white sand beaches that looked like something from a dream. Our suite was enormous, with a glass floor that looked down into the water below and a private deck with direct ocean access. It was perfect. It was everything I'd dreamed of for my honeymoon. And Daniel wasn't here to enjoy it. The thought sent a dark thrill through me. He was probably back home now, dealing with the aftermath of the wedding, trying to explain to our families why his bride had vanished. He was probably panicking, calling everyone we knew, maybe even filing a missing person report. Meanwhile, I was checking into the honeymoon suite with his best man. "This is unreal," Marcus said, looking around the suite with wide eyes. "Sarah, this place is incredible." I had to agree. The resort was luxury beyond anything I'd ever experienced. The staff treated us like royalty, calling me Mrs. Morrison and offering every amenity imaginable. Spa treatments, private beach access, a personal butler who could arrange anything from champagne to midnight stargazing. But the most beautiful part wasn't the setting, it was the freedom. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like I could breathe. I wasn't performing, wasn't trying to be the perfect girlfriend or the perfect fiancée or the perfect wife. I was just Sarah, figuring out who that person was without Daniel's expectations defining me. Marcus seemed to understand this instinctively. He didn't try to fill the silence with empty conversation or treat me like I was fragile. He just existed in the space with me, letting me process everything at my own pace. That first day, we barely left the suite. I spent hours on the deck, staring out at the ocean, feeling the sun on my skin, and trying to reconcile where I was supposed to be emotionally with where I actually was. I should have been devastated, should have been curled up in a ball somewhere crying over my ruined marriage. Instead, I felt powerful, like I'd taken control of my own narrative for the first time in years. Marcus found me there as the sun was setting, the sky painted in shades of pink and gold that no photograph could capture. "How are you doing?" he asked, settling into the chair beside me. "Better than I expected," I said honestly. "I thought I'd be a wreck by now." "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for." I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt something shift in my chest. He'd been nothing but kind to me, nothing but supportive, even when I'd dragged him into this insane situation. He'd given up his own life to be here with me, to help me through this. "Marcus," I said slowly, "why did you agree to come with me?" He was quiet for a long moment, watching the waves roll in. "Because you deserved better than what he gave you. Because I've watched you shrink yourself for years, trying to be what he wanted instead of being who you are. Because ... He paused, then looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Because I've been half in love with you since the day Daniel introduced us, and I figured this might be my only chance to show you what you're worth." The words hung in the air between us like a bridge I could choose to cross or burn. I thought about Daniel, about the way he'd looked at me during our vows, the promises he'd made just hours before destroying them. I thought about Rebecca, about the practiced ease with which they'd moved together, about how long this had been going on without my knowledge. I thought about Marcus, who had been there through everything, who had dropped his own life to be here with me in my moment of crisis, who was looking at me like I was something precious instead of something broken. "Show me," I said quietly. What happened next was nothing like the angry, vengeful encounter I might have expected. Marcus kissed me like I was made of spun glass, like he was afraid I might disappear if he moved too fast. His hands were gentle on my face, his touch reverent. It was everything Daniel's touch had never been, worshipful instead of demanding, focused on my pleasure instead of his own. Marcus paid attention to every sound I made, every response, like he was learning a language he'd been waiting his whole life to speak. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he pressed his forehead to mine. "Are you okay?" he asked. I laughed, surprised by the sound. "I'm perfect." And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I meant it. We spent the next week in paradise. Not the honeymoon I'd planned, but something better. A healing, a discovery, a rebirth. Marcus showed me parts of myself I'd forgotten existed, parts Daniel had never bothered to find. We snorkeled in coral gardens that looked like underwater cities. We had dinner on the beach under stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. We talked for hours about everything and nothing, and I realized I'd never had conversations like this with Daniel. Real conversations, where both people were fully present and engaged. Marcus made me laugh until my sides hurt. He listened when I needed to cry. He held me when the grief hit in unexpected waves, and he celebrated with me when I had moments of pure joy. And yes, we had sex. Lots of it. The kind of sex that felt like worship. Like art, like everything I'd been missing without knowing it. Marcus approached my body like he was exploring a new country, curious and reverent and utterly focused on my pleasure. With Daniel, sex had been routine, predictable. He knew what buttons to push to get me to orgasm, but it always felt mechanical, like he was completing a task rather than sharing an experience. With Marcus, every touch was electric. Every kiss was a conversation. Every moment was about connection rather than completion. I felt like I was waking up from a long sleep. On the fourth day, I finally listened to Daniel's voicemails. The first few were panicked, desperate. He'd realized I was gone, had apparently torn apart our hotel room looking for clues. He was sorry, he said. So sorry. It was a mistake, a moment of weakness. It didn't mean anything. The middle messages were angry. How could I just disappear? How could I embarrass him like this? People were asking questions. His family was upset. Didn't I care about what this was doing to him? The last ones were different. Quiet, broken. He'd figured out I'd taken the honeymoon tickets. He knew I wasn't coming back. "Sarah," his voice was barely a whisper. "I know I fucked up. I know I destroyed everything. But please, please don't do this. Don't throw away 4 years for one mistake. I love you. I've always loved you. "Come home and we'll figure this out." I deleted the messages without feeling anything at all. Marcus found me on the deck afterwards, staring out at the ocean. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Free," I said, and meant it. That night, we made love with an intensity that surprised us both. It was like we were claiming each other, marking territory, making promises with our bodies that we weren't ready to say out loud yet. Afterward, as we lay tangled together on the bed, Marcus traced patterns on my skin with his fingertips. "What happens when we go home?" he asked quietly. I'd been dreading this question, this conversation. In this bubble of paradise, it was easy to pretend the real world didn't exist, but we'd have to go back eventually, have to face the consequences of what we'd done. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I'll have to file for divorce. Deal with the fallout. Figure out what I want my life to look like. And us?" I turned to face him, studying his features in the moonlight filtering through the windows. "What do you want us to be?" "Everything," he said simply. "I want to be everything you need, everything you deserve. I want to love you the way you should be loved." The words should have scared me. A week ago, I'd been married to another man. A week ago, I'd thought I knew what my future looked like. Now I was lying naked with Daniel's best friend, having the best sex of my life, feeling more myself than I had in years. It should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt like coming home. "I want that too," I whispered. We spent the rest of the night talking about possibilities, about what we might build together. It wasn't a rebound, wasn't some desperate attempt to fill the void Daniel had left. It was recognition. Two people who had been circling each other for years, finally free to acknowledge what had always been there. The next morning, I turned on my phone to find a text from my sister. "Daniel's been calling everyone. He's losing his mind. Mom wants to know if you're safe." I showed the message to Marcus, who smiled grimly. "Good," he said. "Let him lose his mind. Let him feel a fraction of what you felt." I typed back, "I'm safe. I'm exactly where I need to be. Tell Daniel I'll call him when I'm ready." Then I turned the phone off again. We had 3 more days in paradise, and I intended to enjoy every minute of them. The resort staff had no idea about the drama swirling around us. To them, we were just another honeymooning couple, blissfully happy and completely absorbed in each other. They brought us champagne and chocolate-covered strawberries, arranged romantic dinners on the beach, treated us like we were the most important people in the world. And maybe in that moment we were. I felt beautiful with Marcus in a way I'd never felt with Daniel. He looked at me like I was art, like I was something precious and rare. He noticed details, the way I laughed at his jokes, how I moved when I was happy, the face I made when I was concentrating on something. Daniel had looked at me like I was his. Marcus looked at me like I was me. The difference was intoxicating. On our last night, we had dinner on the beach under a canopy of stars. The resort had set up a private table for us, complete with candles and flowers and the kind of romantic atmosphere that belonged in movies. "I have a confession," Marcus said over dessert. I raised an eyebrow. "Oh? I used to imagine what it would be like to be here with you. When Daniel was planning this whole thing, talking about how perfect it was going to be, how lucky he was, I used to picture myself in his place." "That's terrible," I said, but I was smiling. "It is, isn't it? I'm a terrible friend." "You're the best friend," I corrected. "You're the friend who saw what I needed and gave it to me, even when it was complicated. Is that what this is? Friendship?" I considered the question. Marcus had become many things to me over the past week: lover, confidant, supporter, partner. But underneath it all, he was my friend. The kind of friend who would drop everything to help me through a crisis, who would listen without judgment, who would make me laugh when I needed it most. "It's friendship," I said finally. "And it's everything else too." He reached across the table and took my hand, his thumb tracing circles on my palm. "Sarah, I need you to know something. This isn't just about getting back at Daniel for me. This isn't some revenge fantasy. I genuinely care about you. I have for years." "I know," I said. "I can feel it. And I need you to know that whatever happens when we go home, whatever you decide about your marriage, about us, about your future, I'll support you, even if it means stepping back." The thought of him stepping back, of losing this connection we'd built, made my chest tight with panic. "I don't want you to step back." "Good," he said, smiling. "Because I don't want to either." We flew home the next day, both of us dreading the return to reality. The flight felt different, heavier, more complicated. We weren't just Sarah and Marcus anymore, existing in a perfect bubble. We were two people who had made choices that would have consequences, who had crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed, I turned my phone on during our layover in Dubai and watched 2 weeks' worth of messages flood in. Daniel, of course, but also my family, friends, even some of our wedding guests who had heard about my disappearance. The most recent message was from Daniel, sent just an hour ago. "I know you're coming home today. I'll be waiting at the airport." I showed the message to Marcus, who frowned. "You don't have to see him if you're not ready," he said. "I'm ready," I said, surprised by my own certainty. "I want to see him. I want to look him in the eye and tell him exactly what I think of him." And then I thought about the question. What came after the confrontation? What came after I told Daniel that our marriage was over, that I was filing for divorce, that I was done with his lies and his betrayal and his assumption that I would always be there to clean up his messes? "Then I start over," I said. "We start over." Marcus squeezed my hand. "Together?" "Together." Daniel was waiting at baggage claim when we landed, looking haggard and desperate. He'd lost weight, his clothes hung loose on his frame, and there were dark circles under his eyes that makeup couldn't hide. He saw us before we saw him, and I watched his face cycle through confusion, understanding, and then pure rage. His eyes locked on our joined hands, on the matching tans we'd acquired, on the easy intimacy between us that couldn't be faked or hidden. "You've gotta be fucking kidding me," he said, his voice carrying across the crowded terminal. People turned to stare. Marcus stepped slightly in front of me, protective, but I moved around him. This was my confrontation to have. "Hello, Daniel," I said calmly. "You took him," Daniel said, his voice rising. "You took my best friend on our honeymoon. You fucked my best friend in the bed that was supposed to be ours." "That's rich coming from you," I replied. "Considering I found you fucking my cousin in the bathroom at our wedding." Daniel flinched like I'd slapped him. "Sarah, that was a mistake? A moment of weakness? It didn't mean anything." I shook my head. "Save it, Daniel. I'm done with your explanations." "So you thought you'd get back at me by destroying my friendship with Marcus? By ruining everything?" "I didn't destroy anything," I said. "You did. The moment you decided to stick your dick in my cousin, you destroyed our marriage, your friendship with Marcus, and any chance we had of working things out." Marcus was standing behind me, silent but solid, letting me handle this my way. I could feel his support like a physical thing, giving me strength. "He's my best friend," Daniel said, his voice breaking. "And you're my wife." "I was your wife," I corrected. "I was your wife when you were cheating on me. I was your wife when you were making a mockery of our vows. I was your wife when you decided Rebecca was more important than our marriage." "It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that." I took a step closer, my voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more weight than shouting. "And you know what the beautiful part is, Daniel? I'm happier than I've been in years. Turns out when you're not constantly disappointing me, life is pretty amazing." Daniel's face crumpled. "Sarah, please. I love you. I've always loved you. We can fix this. Couples counseling, therapy, whatever you need. Just please don't throw away 4 years for one mistake." "One mistake?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Daniel, you were fucking my cousin, my maid of honor, at our wedding. That's not a mistake, that's a choice. A series of choices. And you know what? I'm making a choice too." I pulled off my wedding ring and held it out to him. "I'm choosing to be with someone who sees me as more than just a convenience. Someone who makes me feel beautiful and valued and worthy of real love. Someone who would never, ever betray me the way you did." Daniel stared at the ring like it was a snake. "You can't do this." "I already did." I dropped the ring at his feet. "I'll be in touch about the divorce." I turned to walk away, Marcus beside me, but Daniel's voice stopped me. "You think he's different?" he called out. "You think he won't get bored? Won't find someone else? You think you're so special that he'll never hurt you the way I did?" I turned back to him, and for the first time in this entire conversation I smiled. "You know what, Daniel? Maybe he will. Maybe this will all blow up in my face. Maybe I'll get my heart broken again. But at least I'll have had something real, something passionate, something worth fighting for. At least I'll have had a man who looked at me like I was the most important thing in his world." "I looked at you like that," Daniel said desperately. "No," I said quietly. "You looked at me like I was yours. There's a difference." And with that, I walked away from my marriage, my old life, and the man who had tried to keep me small. Marcus and I didn't talk much on the drive to my apartment. There was too much to process, too many emotions swirling between us. The confrontation with Daniel had been cathartic, but it had also been final. There was no going back now, no pretending this was all some elaborate revenge fantasy. I was divorced, or would be soon. I was starting over at 28, trying to figure out who I was without Daniel's expectations shaping me. It was terrifying and exhilarating and completely overwhelming. Marcus helped me carry my bags upstairs, then stood awkwardly in my living room like he wasn't sure what came next. "So," he said finally. "So," I agreed. "What now?" I looked around the apartment Daniel and I had shared, at the photos of us together, at the life we'd built that now felt like a museum exhibit. Everything here was a reminder of who I used to be, of the woman who had been content to be half of a couple instead of fully herself. "Now I figure out what I want," I said. "What I actually want, not what I thought I was supposed to want." Marcus nodded. "And us?" I studied his face. This man who had been my salvation, my awakening, my partner in the most beautiful rebellion of my life. "I want to see where this goes. I want to date you properly, to build something real with you. I want to find out what we are when we're not running away from something. Even if it's complicated? Even if people talk? Especially then." I moved closer to him, close enough to touch. "Marcus, you showed me what it feels like to be cherished. You showed me what I was missing, what I deserved. Why would I walk away from that?" He pulled me into his arms, and I felt that same sense of rightness I'd experienced in the Maldives. This was where I belonged, not with the man I'd married, but with the man who had helped me remember who I was. "I love you," he said quietly. "I know it's too soon to say that. I know everything is complicated, but I need you to know. I love you too," I whispered back, and felt the truth of it settle into my bones. 6 months later, I'm sitting in a coffee shop working on my laptop when my phone buzzes with a text from an unknown number. "Sarah, this is Rebecca. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I needed to tell you that Daniel and I broke up. I also wanted to tell you that I'm sorry. Not just for sleeping with him, but for not being strong enough to tell you what was happening. You deserved better from both of us." I stare at the message for a long moment, then delete it without responding. Rebecca's apology, Daniel's regret, their relationship imploding, none of it matters to me anymore. That chapter of my life is closed. Marcus appears at my table with 2 cups of coffee, settling across from me with the easy familiarity of someone who knows my order by heart. "Work or play?" he asks, nodding at my laptop. "Work. I'm finishing up that proposal for the Morrison account." He grins. "I like the sound of that name." "You should. It's going to be yours in about 6 months. Marcus and I got engaged last month. Not because we needed to prove anything to anyone, not because we were trying to recreate what I'd lost, but because we'd built something real together. Something based on friendship and respect, and the kind of love that makes you better rather than smaller. The wedding will be small, intimate, nothing like the production Daniel and I had planned. Just us, our families, and the people who matter most. Marcus suggested we honeymoon in the Maldives again, but I declined. That trip was about healing, about rebirth, about finding myself again. Our next trip will be about celebration, about the future we're building together. My phone buzzes again. This time it's my sister. "Mom wants to know if you're bringing Marcus to Sunday dinner." I show the message to Marcus, who laughs. "Your mother terrifies me. She likes you. She likes that I'm not Daniel. She likes that you make me happy, and I am happy." Not the desperate, grasping happiness I'd convinced myself I felt with Daniel, but the deep, settled happiness of someone who knows exactly where they belong. I'm happy with my work, with my friends, with the life I've built for myself. I'm happy with Marcus, who loves me exactly as I am and challenges me to be even better. Most of all, I'm happy with myself, with the woman who was strong enough to walk away from a marriage that was slowly killing her soul, who was brave enough to take a risk on something real, who was smart enough to recognize love when it finally showed up. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't walked into that bathroom, if I'd never discovered Daniel's betrayal. Would I have spent years in a marriage that was slowly eroding my sense of self? Would I have ever realized what I was missing? I think about that woman sometimes, the one who was so grateful for Daniel's attention that she forgot to ask for his respect, the one who was so afraid of being alone that she stayed with someone who made her feel lonely, the one who was so focused on being the perfect wife that she forgot to be herself. I feel sorry for her, but I'm also grateful. Her pain led to my liberation. Her betrayal led to my awakening. Her ending led to my beginning. And what a beginning it is. Marcus reaches across the table and takes my hand, his thumb tracing the engagement ring he placed there, a simple band with a stone that catches the light like captured starlight. "What are you thinking about?" he asks. "Just everything. How different things are now. Better different or worse different. I think about the question, about the life I'm living now versus the one I thought I wanted. I think about waking up next to someone who looks at me like I'm a miracle, about building a business that excites me, about friends who see me as more than just half of a couple. I think about revenge, not the bitter, destructive kind, but the kind that comes from living well, from building something beautiful from the ashes of what was destroyed. Better, I say finally. So much better. Marcus smiles and brings my hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to my knuckles. Good. Because I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure it stays that way. And as I sit here in this coffee shop, engaged to a man who loves me completely, building a life that feels authentically mine, I can't help but think that sometimes the best revenge is simply being happy. Daniel took my wedding day, my trust, and my innocence. But in the end, he gave me something more valuable, the courage to demand better. The strength to walk away, the wisdom to recognize real love when it finally found me. He cheated with my cousin at our wedding, so I left with the honeymoon tickets and his best man. And I've never looked back.